Welcome to Monkey Bullshit, where yes, we're talking about racist cops again. I'm not saying all cops are racist, it just happens that there seems to be quite a few. This time it's in Wilmington, North Carolina, where 3 cops were fired for being caught on video being openly racist as well as advocating civil war. According to the Washington Post, one of the officers who had been on the force since 1997, Officer Piner, he had turned the conversation to his belief that a civil war was imminent and his intention to buy high-powered weaponry. After saying he was ready to slaughter black people, he added, "God, I can't wait."
Transcriptions from a video recorded on one corporal's onboard camera show these 3 men used racist language. Some of it so vulgar we won't repeat it on TV. Some of it is violent towards African Americans.
Some of it is violent towards African Americans. I'll definitely say that. The shocking threat came amid extended, openly racist conversations between Piner, 44, and 2 other police officers, 50-year-old Corporal Jesse E. Moore II and 48-year-old Officer James Brian Gilmore. The men freely dropped racial slurs, suggest killing black residents, and deride protesters. "Wipe them off the fucking map," Piner said of African Americans. "That'll put them back about 4 or 5 generations." This is how deeply ingrained this hate is. Later, while complaining about a black judge whom Moore called a fucking Negro magistrate, Moore added, "It's bad, man, because not all black people are like that." "Most of them," Piner responded. 90% of them. Kevin, 90 fucking percent of them, Moore said. Again, the belief that we are inherently bad. 90% of us. This is the open discussion that these officers are having about American citizens. Later, Moore, who also was hired in 1997, called him to describe a recent arrest of a black woman, repeatedly calling her a racial slur. "She needed a bullet in the head right then and move on," Moore said of the woman. "Let's move the body out of the way and keep going." Oh, and it's not just citizens, it's also their fellow officers. The 2 then complained about black officers on the force, calling one a piece of shit and complaining that another was sitting on his ass during the protest. "Let's see how his boys take care of him when shit goes rough. See if they don't put a bullet in his head," Piner said. Now, I had a good friend ask me a question because she just honestly did not know. There's all these black officers on the police forces. Why aren't they coming out talking about all this injustice that they have to be seeing? And right here we have this great example of officers threatening to not respond if another officer needs help. And so what that means is that if a cop tells on another cop his life is actually on the line because they won't show up and help him, or they may be in a shootout and shoot him in the back of the head, right? And that's the extreme. That's not even to say that in the sense of that it's a good old boys club. Now you might not be able to advance. You may run up into this opposition that this other LAPD officer, I believe his name was Doran, something like that. Remember him? He snapped, blew off the heads of a few other police and their families, wrote this manifesto. Dave Chappelle talked about it.
Officer Michael Piner, Corporal Jesse Moore, and Officer James Gilmore are all being fired. The police department says these conversations were discovered internally as part of a regular monthly review of video footage.
Now, according to the Washington Post, these officers' vile discussions came to light purely by chance on June 4th. A sergeant was conducting routine video reviews when she found a nearly 2-hour long clip from Piner's cruise created by an accidental activation. According to a department report, after listening to the racist discussion, she alerted a superior who started an internal investigation. Now, one, I want to say that it was an accidental activation that got this cop caught by chance. So we don't even know how many officers are out there that are just like this. It brings up how important it is that video surveillance be nationwide. All cops should have to wear body cameras. It also brings to light that, yes, these officers were good, but should it not be citizens watching the watchmen?
When I first learned of these conversations, I was shocked, saddened, and disgusted. There is no place for this behavior in our agency or our city, and it will not be tolerated.
And again, kudos to this police chief. He just happened to be hired 3 days ago. And so, of course, one of his first responsibilities was to fire these 3 racist officers.
Now, the district attorney's office will be reviewing cases where these 3 officers may have shown bias, and this behavior will also be reported to the North Carolina Criminal Justice Training and Standards Commission.
Now, one of the things that is the big talk today is defund the police. And, of course, how it's spun on the right is it means do away with the police, have no police force. No, of course, things take context. You can't just go off of the first few words or the headlines. You have to actually read the full article, right? And the full article about defund the police is actually saying, how about we move resources into other human services within a municipality so that people who are overdosing or having issues that are maybe mental illness or things of that nature, that you have these other resources that can go out and help citizens. We might not need a militarized police force to handle every little thing, like checking on children in school. And an article like this is exactly what I mean by the same old thing. PBS says FBI warned of white supremacists in law enforcement 10 years ago. Has anything changed? Right? This is from 2016, talking about the FBI warning about white supremacists a decade ago. And just in 2016, the FBI put out a bulletin detailing the threat of white nationalists and skinheads infiltrating the police. Back when I was growing up, there were these Lenox sheriffs as well as Linwood sheriffs. They had these Viking gangs. It was called a little bit something different, but I can't remember it. But I remember them being this gang. They would ride by, they'd throw up signs and whatever, and they knew all the other gang signs. And these guys were known to be dirty cops. Back in 1991, a judge found that these guys were actually a part of a neo-Nazi group, and that the department heads knew about it. They just said, oh, it was a social club, despite the fact that 70 plus residents filed a case against these officers stating that they had systematic acts of shooting, killing, brutality, terrorism, house trashing, and abuses of power. This is back when I was growing up. I actually ran into these officers who were a gang, throwing up gang signs. This is not anything new. This is, again, what we are saying over and over again. You're wondering why people are out in the streets, because you don't respect us as human beings. You won't listen to us. and thereby our only recourse is to go out into the streets and protest. Right now, they're peaceful protests, but you wouldn't know it by how the right is still talking about the rioting. That wasn't rioting, just uproar, unrest, just people being upset. That's subsided, and peaceful protests have mostly reigned. You have a few bad apples, just like they say about the cops, a few bad apples. One of the things that has people trapped within white supremacy and actually have them as unconscious racists, as the good patriot would say, is that they lack knowledge or they lack an understanding of their history. Like the police force being rooted in slave patrols. Men who went out to basically round up runaway slaves, people looking to get their freedom. These slave patrols then become the KKK, who are trying to make sure that the free Africans don't get free. They have to stay and work and now be reintroduced to a new form of slavery. And so the police have never been about protecting and serving, at least not people who are non-European. They've always been about bashing and brutalizing for those of us who are not European.